Have you ever walked through Disneyland and wondered why some lands like Adventureland, Frontierland, and Tomorrowland have a sign out front, but lands like Fantasyland, New Orleans Square, and Galaxy's Edge don't? It's certainly a puzzler because you'd think that a sign would be really useful for knowing how to get around Disneyland, especially if it's your first visit. The truth is, each land at Disneyland has its own reasons for having a sign versus not having a sign, and today we'll talk about each of those reasons. But the basic rule of thumb is that the lands with a sign usually don't have a weenie, and if it does have a weenie, it's not exactly obvious what the land's theme is. Now, if the term weenie sounds strange or funny to you, then maybe I should clarify what it means. You see, Walt wanted the park to be designed like a movie set, where the guests could be influenced to move around using visual draws. When people enter the park, they are drawn further into the center of it thanks to the castle sitting at the very end of Main Street. People see the castle and their curiosity entices them to get a closer look at it. So, Walt considered icons like the castle as a weenie, referring to when you get a dog's attention by waving a tasty hot dog in front of it. When you examine the main entrance of Fantasyland, you will notice that there is no big sign out front telling you what the land is beyond the castle. The answer might be painfully obvious, but it was assumed that if you looked at the fairy tale castle, you would associate it with the land of make-believe and fantasy. But what about Tomorrowland in 1955? It certainly did not have a large sign out front, and again it was because this land also featured a weenie in the form of a large rocket that sat near the far edge of the land. If this space featured a large rocket and futuristic architecture, it was pretty obvious that this was the land of tomorrow. But what about the land of today? In other words, modern Tomorrowland. In 1998, when the new Tomorrowland emerged in its steampunk-style color scheme, it wasn't immediately obvious what the land was. Even with the large Astro Orbiter out front, Imagineering still felt it was important to incorporate Tomorrowland's first official sign. But in 2015, for Tomorrowland's Season of the Force, new signs were installed to advertise the temporary overlay. As it turned out, that sign would never be removed, and instead, the second iteration of the Tomorrowland sign took over it, even while Disneyland removed the 1998 sign back in 2019. How about Main Street? Why doesn't it have a sign? Well, to be honest, it doesn't need it. Not only does Main Street speak for itself, but originally it wasn't considered an official land at Disneyland. Main Street was more like the red carpet to the show. Plus, when people entered the park, they didn't have to seek out Main Street because the only way in or out of the park was by going through this area. So what about Adventureland? I think the 1955 entrance spoke for itself. If you can imagine this space without a sign, then you'll see that it wasn't obvious what land was behind this gateway. Therefore, it needed to be labeled. Today, the Tiki Room entrance of Adventureland might advertise itself without the need for a sign. But by this point, the sign is part of this land's entrance tradition. The same goes for Frontierland. You might argue that in 1955, the Mark Twain riverboat was considered Frontierland's weenie. People would see the boat from the gateway and know that this land is of the western frontier. However, the Imagineers knew that boat only sits at the dock every 20 minutes. So most of the time there would be very little aside from the old log fort to signify what land this was. I mean, what if this was Adventureland? So, as you know, the land was given a sign. You could say that today Big Thunder Mountain serves as Frontierland's weenie. But while this is true, you can't see Big Thunder Mountain from Frontierland's entrance. Now you might look at New Orleans Square and immediately know that it looks just like the French Quarter of the Big Easy. However, one could rightfully point out that this land most certainly could use an entrance sign. But the reason it never got one was because for several years during this land's development, it was going to be considered not as its own land, but as an expansion of Frontierland. Frontierland already had a New Orleans Street, but Walt wanted something bigger and more immersive, so he intended to extend New Orleans Street so it led to the massive square beyond it. And so New Orleans Square was indeed a land of its own, but it was always considered a large neighborhood of Frontierland. That's why the New Orleans Square train station still read Frontierland Station all the way up until 1997 when they changed it. Critter Country has an icon right there at the entrance, but the exterior of Splash Mountain certainly didn't make it very obvious as to what you can expect at Critter Country. So in this case, a sign was necessary to identify the land and what it was all about. Toontown, well, I mean, do I even have to say it? Without the sign, would anyone ever know there was something under that creepy bridge? Well, I've gone through the park and showed you why certain lands have signs and why others don't, and usually it has to do with several factors, whether or not the land has an icon that makes it blatantly obvious what the land is themed to, or in some cases it's traditional to have or not to have a sign there. But now comes the part where we break away from those notions altogether and try to figure out why Galaxy's Edge does not have a sign. The land has an icon. Yes, it's the Millennium Falcon, but it's not visible from any of the entrances. In fact, it's not visible at all until you go deep into Galaxy's Edge and find it in the back corner. And just like the entrance of Toontown, Galaxy's Edge requires you to enter from underneath the railroad tracks. All 3 entrances are unmarked. So how in the world are you supposed to know what is beyond these entrances, and whether or not it has what you are looking for? Well, frankly, the only answer I can surmise is that if you are coming to Disneyland with the express purpose of going to Galaxy's Edge, you likely already know how to get there, or you have asked a cast member for directions. And even if you never knew that Galaxy's Edge existed, you would still see the large crowds of people going in and out of the entrances, which would entice your curiosity to look inside. Even still, every land at Disneyland has a reason for having or not having a sign out front, and it all has to do with whether or not the theme is understandable from the land's entry point. Many Disney fans love Disneyland's signs. They're beautiful and creative. Maybe you want to know more about them. And that's exactly what you'll find at Signs of Amusement, a YouTube channel that highlights the history and creativity of Disneyland Resort's signs. And the best part is, you can purchase any of the signs Jason makes on his show. So check out Signs of Amusement. Links will be in the end of the video and in the description below. So anyway, now you know why some lands have a sign and some don't. But what do you think? Does Galaxy's Edge need a sign? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.